Picture me about a year ago. Hi, I'm Dave Brat. I'm a local professor. I'm running against the United States Majority Leader of Congress. Would you help me out? Who? What? Right? So if you ever think you're having a tough one, try making those cold calls. And that's how it was for a while. But then grassroots started rooting for me, and I think it's all kind of peaked right now. In my 7th district is very steeped in history, right? So I gave my talk at St. John's Church where Patrick Henry gave his famous thing. And then James Madison, the author of the Constitution, is in Montpelier. That's in my district, right? So my district's got a lot of historical education. And Madison these days, it is amazing, the elites, the rich power broker elites that run some of these things are trying to take and strip religion out of everything. And so even you go on a tour of Jefferson or Montpelier, where they call everyone a deist, right? They say they're a deist. They don't believe in a personal God and all this kind of stuff. And that's just a bunch of baloney. When Madison finished, he went to school at, roughly speaking, Princeton Seminary, right? So kind of happy about that. It was called the College of New Jersey. But after he graduated, he stuck around just for kicks and took Hebrew, right? And so no one knows any of this stuff. I was at a Library of Congress thing a few weeks ago, and they were calling a couple of the other guys deists, Hamilton, Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin they call a deist all the time. And Ben Franklin is on the record all over the place saying, hey, we were on our knees praying to God every 5 seconds when they were shooting at us, right? When we needed God's protection, we're praying left and right, and now God's delivered us, and we're not thankful anymore. And so that shows you, he's not some deist who believes in some God who's checked out. He believes in a God that's interacting with us in history. And I can go on and on and on all this kind of stuff. In terms of what this room is about, I'm hearing religious liberty is a big thing. I think Senator Mike Lee just spoke somewhat on that. We got a good bill going through. Raul Labrador has a bill on religious liberty. I think it's going to go through the House. I can't imagine it doesn't, but this place is just so crazy. You can't make it up. And then hopefully we get it through the Senate. The Senate's even harder. We call them the incumbent protection zone. Right over here, they don't like to vote, because if you vote, you might get kicked out of office. But that's your job, so you're supposed to be voting. And then we got to make it across President Obama's desk. And that's where I think you all can play a huge role, right? I went to seminary, and it's very interesting on the politics. He comes out and says, I'm Christian, and et cetera, and he'll quote the prophets on immigration, et cetera. You got to take care of the stranger, you got to take care of the sojourner, and you know all the texts and all that. And so one day I was feeling a little smart alecky one day on the radio, and I said, if he's quoting Hebrew scripture, I hope he's aware that the Hebrews had 620 other laws in addition to that one. I said, so if he wants to follow that, I wish him the best. I'm with him, but I hope he wants to follow the other 620, and then the author of the law in the New Testament. And so I think he needs to be pushed there intellectually, not in a petty way. I've never run a negative ad personally. I don't fight that way. But on the other hand, there's a spiritual battle going on. There's no doubt about that. And so if he wants to invoke Scripture, let's join it and let's finish the Scripture debate, right? And say, are we all in here? And that's a tricky deal. And so in terms of the religious liberty, this country was founded, and this is very interesting, right? It kind of worked, right, on separation of church and state. Meaning, the First Amendment says no establishment. You're not supposed to establish a state church. So I think we all agree with that part. But then there's a comma, but free expression. You should be able to freely express any view you want, anywhere you want. And that is taking a back seat now. This political correctness business is shutting down pastors, it's shutting down the public school system, it's shutting down dialogue on the most important issues, right? And number one, mentioning God in public. And people look at you sideways like you're crazy these days, right? I mean, and this has happened just probably in the last 30 years or so. When I was growing up, there was no, you could talk about God, no big deal, whatever. And now, boy, you bring up God or religion, and it's just been framed in a terrible way. And I think we need to push back on that big time. And I always encourage parents and pastors, you can have a huge impact. One little experiment you can do is, and you don't want to do it in a kind of bullying way, but your kids and all the kids in your parishes should go into their public school, and when they're getting taught about whatever, say, well, how does that fit in with Moses and Jesus? Right? If you're studying science, if you're studying cosmology, who made the stuff, the Big Bang? I'm a full science guy, right? I did a PhD in economic science. But if you're bringing up science, little Johnny or little Mary should raise their hand and say, well, yeah, but who caused the Big Bang? Right? So I believe in a Big Bang. Right? But who caused the Big Bang? And the kids should learn to get some guts, and we don't teach the kids to have any guts. We just teach them to back off whenever the teacher says, no, Johnny, we'll deal with that tomorrow or something. And that's what's going wrong. And then K-12 is pretty good on that. The teachers there, we all know them, they live in our community. But the university system, it's an all-on assault against religion. And that I know. So I was at Princeton Seminary. I got a chance to go to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and wherever. And in those, just so you know, in those philosophy departments, if you bring up religion, you get poo-pooed to your face immediately and they shut you down, period. You cannot do religion in those philosophy. They reject, and just so no one is clear on this, they reject not only God at all the major leading philosophy departments. Right? They reject natural law. So any Catholic long-standing tradition from Aristotle through Aquinas, all that, no way, no natural law. And they reject human reason, which is a shocker, right? So the Judeo-Christian tradition, I think most of the people in this room, right, it kind of combined Judeo-Christian tradition with reason that started with the Greeks, and Western history is putting those two together. And there's no answer, right? No one's got some answer to it all, but that's the tradition, and we're still fighting with it. But in the highest schools in the land, they reject that entire tradition. And usually you see whatever Harvard does, your culture's doing 30 or 40 years later. Right? And so look at what they're doing 30 or 40 years ago. Boom. Right. And so I wrote a little book on it. It kind of started with the Hebrews, the beginning of the Judeo-Christian tradition, ended with Martin Luther King, who I seriously think is kind of the end of the tradition. After Martin Luther King, right, I always ask people, name me someone of stature these days that's nationally known in theology. A name you can name, right? Billy Graham maybe, but he's senior now. Who else? Right? Who's on the national stage carrying on the religious dialogue, theology at a deep level? Right? Kind of pop stars, Robert Schuller, the guy down in Dallas. Right, there's some big names, right, there's some names. But in terms of, there's no Martin Luther Kings. Right? There's no one that you're looking to that's saying, here's the leader that's carrying the day. And so I just got into Congress this year. I'm happy to be a resource for you all in any way I can be. Just come to my office. I'm in Cannon 330. Whatever you need. We got the Library of Congress. We have tremendous assets that we can help pastors. I can host groups if you want to bring kids up for tours or have rooms like this for kids. I'm all in. I basically ran on the religious thing even more than the economics and the ethics thing. And so whatever you need, let me know. Yes, Tom?
One thing I would like for you to address, because these men are from communities in distress.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I should have.
Are people you work with on committee. And we're going to need to replace a few of them. Yeah. Congressman, you were able to take out the second most powerful congressional leader in the country. Unprecedented. With very, very limited resources.
Yeah.
In fact, they found out that Congressman Brat spent the amount of money he spent on his campaign. Congressman Eric Cantor, who was a majority leader at the time, spent that much money in one evening at a restaurant in town.
Steakhouses.
The one across the street from the Del Frisco that one of the pastors in the room was looking for last night,
Right.
Bobby Bass.
Right.
Give us, in order for them to now go back to their community with what we've
Yeah.
been sharing with them over these couple of days and what we will be continuing to share with them, they're going to have to go back and perfectly find and identify people that God has tapped to run for office.
Yep.
We have some work to do here, whether it's school board, whether
Right.
it's city council, whether it's
Yep.
local, where we have got to just start the work. What, if you can, in a nutshell, did you build out as a strategy
Right.
to take out the second most powerful man here?
Yeah, well, I hate to tell you, but the night I won, I actually did give it to God on film. I was on the Hannity show, and I said it was a miracle. I had on my office door the whole thing. I think it was Luke 18:27 or something like that. You know, with humans, things not possible. With God, all things are possible. So every day I went to my office and worked. That was on the door. And so people say, how'd you win? How'd you do it? Da, 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 da. Well, number one, you got to be a credible candidate, right? So don't go with some loudmouth, just people who are egomaniacs that just want to run. I always told people in my stump speech I ran on the Plato plan. Plato, the Greek philosopher guy way back in the Republic, said you should be 50. And he said that's because you're near death, right? So you're done with sex and wine and partying and all that kind of stuff, right? Wine, women, and song. And so there was some wisdom in that, right? So the 50 back then was probably near the average death age. And so he said, you're already done with all that junk. And St. Augustine and all that said the same thing, right? So 50, you want to have candidates who are seasoned in some way, right? So I taught in my community for 20 years. Well, so I had 20 years of students out there. So look for candidates that have established connections. Pastors are obvious connection, right? In that way. If you know people who know people, you can't just come out of nowhere. And then people say, well, Dave Brat came out of nowhere. Well, no, I worked in the state legislature for 7 and 8 years as a volunteer. Got to know all the lobbyists and all the whatever. So my opponent made the biggest error in politics. He spent $4.5 million in negative ads on me using my name. And they weren't even good negative ads. I mean, they were just funny. I was a stick man. He said, liberal college professor, and it made me look stupid. I had a dunce hat on or something, right? So even my own kids laughed. And so you got to find some seasoned candidates that have some basic qualifications, and then the network, right? The neighborhood networks, or you have to have been around and have a reputation built up of some sort. So when you're going to get negative attacks, right? People are going to say false things about you, and people got to say that's not true, right? And then it's just the people, right? At first, when I started making those calls, I thought I was doomed. I didn't have one endorsement, right? Eric Cantor had every endorsement from every state senator, every state delegate, every governor, every city council. I had zero, right? And so in the end, when people say, well, you got to have these endorsements, what's the answer? No, you don't. You don't need any of that. You don't need money. You don't need the endorsements. You don't need the powerful people. They've convinced you that they're in charge. And I read a book, Malcolm Gladwell. Y'all probably have read that, the David and Goliath. Right? So he opens with this misconception of what true power is. And there's a biblical thing in there, right? I mean, true power is there, and even the church forgets that. Right? And so true power is not in the checkbooks and lobbyists and how many endorsements you have. And so I just went around giving talks. And I did leave out Mike Lee said he depressed everybody, left everyone in depression, and it's pretty bad. Up here, we're broke. It's pretty gloomy. But the good news is, as pastors, you can share, when you talk about free markets, which I'm a total free market guy, taught economics for 20 years. Adam Smith, right, is the founder of economics back in 1776, same date, right? Economics is founded. Up until that date, here's your evidence, right? You can share with anybody you want. There's no way to overcome this story. And it's the biggest, most powerful story. All of human history, people made about $500 a year to live on per person. All of human history. Until about 1800, and then modern economic growth takes off. And so the average in the country now is about $50,000. Right? So from $500 per capita to $50,000. Now the Pope's going to come into town, and this is getting tricky for me, right? Because I love him on the spiritual plane, but on the economic plane, he gets about a D-. And so he's going to come and talk about the capitalist system and the da-da-da-da-da, right? This nasty capitalist system, do-do-do-do-do. Well, the Pope ought to know better, right? If you're in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I don't know of any country on earth that human nature's ever been good, right? So human nature is bad, right? I mean, how long did it take Adam and Eve to go along? 1 chapter, right? The rest of the book is about redeeming sinful humanity, right? So that's the deal, right? So 1 chapter, go back. So all human nature is bad, and then the Pope says it's capitalism. Well, that's almost a Marxist narrative. Human nature is bad in China. It's bad in Russia. It's bad in Mexico. It's bad in the United States of America. Right? It's human nature. And we all know this. So he says it's capitalism, blah, blah, blah. No, the evidence is China and India in the last 20 years since I started teaching economics. China was making about $1,000 a person 20 years ago. India was making $700. Now, in just 20 years, China's up to about $9,000 per person, from $900, and India's up to $6,000 or $7,000 instead of $600. And so that's the difference between minimum calories and maybe having electricity and some health care for your kids and maybe some housing, etc. Right? So, and here's the punchline: what caused that? And the answer is it's just one thing. Right, and capitalism is the negative. So, I mean, just say the free markets, they chose, and you have to choose it. Your society has to choose the free market system as a way to function. You can't kind of choose freedom, right? Either you're free to pursue your life as you want, or you're not. And so the evidence is in. They're choosing free markets, and they're growing at 7%. We're backing off of free markets, and we're growing at 1.5%. Right? India chose free markets, and they're growing at 6%. And so you just look at the evidence, and there's all this talk about human welfare and da-da-da-da-da. What I just said is the most massive increase and improvement in human welfare in human history. Right? Period. And so you can honestly tell everyone in your flocks, if you really care about human beings, and that's it. Game over, end of story. Right? It's not about these little, every time the government comes in and promises you, well, just let us control this. Let us control this. Let us control the military. Let us control education. Let us control your retirement. Let us control in a house. I taught economics. I asked my kids, name me one part of a house that's not regulated. Anybody? You won't think of one thing. Heck no, you got to have so many. You can only use 1 cup to flush now. Right? I mean, the government's in charge of everything. So if you can't name one part of a house that's not regulated, you don't live in a free society anymore. And so there's the story. You can go sell. I gave these boring economic talks like I'm doing right now, and people somehow liked it. And they voted for me. So go, give them the basics, give them the Judeo-Christian thing, beat them over the head with economic facts until they believe it. Yep.
Great. Congressman Brad, Martin Brown from Richmond. First of all, I just want to say thank you for being here.
Oh, yeah, anytime.
I'm from Richmond, which is where you're from.
Yeah.
And I've actually seen you in not only Churchill, but
Yeah.
at Victory Church
Yeah.
on Chamberlain, and you're saying the same thing.
Right, I say it, right.
A part of what I also appreciate is that you're giving us an example in the same way that you led and won against an incumbent.
Yeah.
With all kinds of stuff against you.
Yep.
We've got a black caucus
Yep.
that would almost be similar to Congressman King.
Right. Right.
And they've got everything in
Yeah.
support of them. You did some practical things.
Yeah.
Like going into the heart of the city.
Yep.
Saying the same thing.
Right.
Living the same way.
Yep.
What can we do as pastors?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
To actually
Right.
change our community the same way that you change.
I got it. You just jogged my. the biggest thing I did when I ran against, people call me Tea Party, right-winger, blah, blah, blah. So I had to get through that. Everyone wants to put you in a pigeonhole, right? I worked for one of the moderate state senators for 7 years. So everyone knew when they start calling me this name, well, I'm over here with a guy who's kind of considered liberal over here for 7 or 8 years. So everyone's going. So I had to somehow get myself out of that box. So what I did, and what you can do with the Black Caucus, I ran on the Republican creed. 6 principles, and I said, the problem with the Republican creed is not the creed. The problem is none of the Republicans follow it. And so you need to find whatever your creed is and make it real simple and stark and show, hey, here's our creed. There's nothing wrong with the creed. The problem is the Black Caucus ain't following the creed. And the Republican creed was adherence to the free market system that I just talked about, equal treatment under the law. So when I walk downtown to the churches and whatever, in any community I go, and I went to Indian friends and Asian, whatever, and I say that one, equal treatment, period. Equal means equal. No special for the Richies, no special for the K Street. You just walk it through. Third was fiscal responsibility. We're broke, right? The nation's broke. 18 trillion in debt, and we have 127 trillion in unfunded liabilities. That's Medicare, Medicaid, and all that. In 10 years, all federal revenues will only go to entitlements. There won't be a dollar left for military, education, transportation. That's what you got heading your way. And that's what the Black Caucus has heading their way. So the irony, I said that to some free market, total free market, young kids who don't quite get it. I said, right now I'm on the budget committee. 2/3 of it's autopilot, and only 1/3 of it is discretionary that we can deal with. In 10 years, all of it is mandatory spending. 100% of the budget is entitlements. And they go, yay! I said, no, you don't quite get it yet. Right? So right? You don't want to, you got to move slowly, right? You don't turn the world over in a day. Wow. Fourth principle, adherence to the Constitution. Fifth, peace through strong military. Right now I got a vacuum in the Middle East. You see what's going on. And sixth, faith in God as recognized by the founders. Absolutely essential to strong moral fiber. So that's the creed, right? I mean, it's not really a Republican creed. And so, but if you can pick and find a creed that you all agree on and use that, hey, this is the deal, right? We're following it. These guys aren't following it. Make your bets.